Hi. This has been coming up quite a bit lately with clients, and it's something that I take for granted a lot of the time because my journey with healing sexual shame has transpired over such a long period of time. And I have made so much progress that I forget where I came from. So let's back up a little bit and maybe let's give you an idea about why I'm so passionate about helping other people to heal their sexual shame. I grew up in a very conservative Christian cult. It was a doomsday cult, actually. And sex was supposed to be great if you were married and very, very evil and sinful if you weren't. So my mother used to admonish me to save all my kisses for my husband, and we were definitely taught to abstain. And also, my mother even told me to wash down there real quickly because I didn't want to get caught touching myself. That might be a sin. Um, I rebelled against that. And there's a reason. I imagine anybody would have rebelled. It was so repressive and so mired in shame that it would have been difficult for any teenage person not to take a rebellious stance. However, there was an added incentive here, and that was the religious hypocrisy. You see, there were pedophiles on both sides of my family. So my mother's grandfather was a pedophile. My uncle Bob was a pedophile. My father incested my sister and I. So don't know how far, definitions vary. It's not like these relatives were preying on strangers' kids. They were targeting their own children. And in the case of some of my cousins, their nieces and nephews. So I saw that. I heard them pounding their Bibles and calling on the name of Jesus every other word. Not my entire family was of the same religious cult that I was raised in, but they were all very, very religious. Some of them were Assembly of God, some were Mormon. So between that religious soup and the incest that was happening behind closed doors and this shame, this sexual shame, it was a very potent soup for me to emerge from. And my first response to that was pretty self-destructive, actually. I went into drugs and alcohol and a lot of promiscuity. And I'm not saying that promiscuity is in and of itself destructive, but the way I did it was. So I was date raped several times, and not a good experience. So by the time I got clean and sober at the age of 25, I was really ready to change my life. And of course, my first impulse was, I'm going to get good, whatever that means. And maybe my mom will be proud of me again. But I very quickly found out that I was bisexual even without alcohol and drugs. I knew I was when I drank. I thought I wouldn't be after I got sober, but I was. There was nothing I could do about that. It's just the way I'm wired. And my initial response to that actually was quite a bit of disappointment because I really wanted to be quote unquote normal, whatever that is. Anyhow, I became very politically active. That's oftentimes what I do when I see something that's not working in my life. I realize it's not working in other people's lives either. So I became very politically active as a bisexual. I wrote for Anything That Moves, which was the first and only national magazine for bisexuals. Anything That Moves. I'm sure you catch the joke. And I did that for 5.5 years. I spoke at colleges, and then I went into the sex industry, and I became very active as a sex rights worker activist. So I was all over the media talking out for sex worker rights. And I still do that, although I retired from being a sex worker in 2004. I'm still very active in speaking out for sex worker rights. So there was this other journey that was going on. It was very private. I wasn't sharing that publicly. I wasn't going on TV to talk about it. But the other journey was my healing process. So I went into therapy very early on in sobriety, almost immediately. Actually, it was probably predated my sobriety date by a couple of weeks. Then I went into a incest survivors group and really started working with the incest issue and trauma for years. For years, I did, and I also got counseling as a rape survivor. Um, and I also volunteered as a rape counselor. So I really took a deep dive in this. And there's you can't skip a step. You have to, if you are a survivor of any kind of sexual assault, you've got to go through the recovery process, which involves a lot of crying and a lot of raging. I mean, just so much righteous rage about being abused in that way. But then a lot of times that particular model doesn't take us to an ecstatic reclaiming of our sexual joy. So I had to kind of find my own way on that. What I found is that when I went into a sex positive community, sometimes the people that I encountered didn't have very good sexual boundaries, and so I would get very triggered because they didn't seem to understand issues around consent. I'm not talking about anything egregious. It wasn't date rape or anything. It was just, too much touching or too much flirting that was unwelcome. So, yeah, I've arrived at this point now where I've gone from being very much controlled by PTSD to just having some layers of PTSD that I'm still working through. But you're really down to the core now. The exterior of my life is really, really unencumbered by that. And then the other thing is that I've gone from being anorgasmic, that means not able to have orgasms, to being multiply orgasmic. It's a beautiful, beautiful path that I'm on. And I would honestly tell you that sexuality is part of my spiritual path today. So take a deep breath on that one because it's so different than the way I was raised. I'm going to leave you with this thought here because I don't want this video to be too long. One of the things that I discovered while I was healing myself was that there is evidence, quite a bit of evidence actually, that fetuses masturbate to the point of orgasm in the womb. Now, aside from the fact that kind of gives me a naughty little pleasure thinking about all of these right-wing churches preaching that birth control is wrong and abortion is wrong, and so therefore we must make as many Christian babies as possible, and at the same time pontificating at the pulpit that masturbation is a sin, and all the while their very, very pregnant parishioners have babies inside them that are masturbating. I think that's funny. But my own sense of humor aside, it does point to what I think is a really important thing, and that is that our relationship to self-pleasuring is actually very core to our well-being, our identity, our physicality. You think about it, it predates your first breath of air, your first sip of mother's milk, and just exactly what while they're having orgasms. We know they're not thinking about porn. They've never seen it. They're not thinking about touching another person. They've never done that. They're not thinking about falling in love or having relationships. So what exactly are they thinking about? Or are they thinking about anything? Sometimes when I'm working with clients who are really weighed down with a lot of shame, I try to take them back to that initial experience of being a sexual creature in your mother's womb before it got associated with all kinds of other dark things or limiting things or shame. And I want to also just be clear that when I talk about healing shame, I am not talking about absolving ourselves of responsibility. There's a difference between being ashamed and feeling responsible for any kind of harm that we've created. So in my recovery process, I had to make an inventory of all the people I'd harmed. I had to go and make amends wherever possible. I really believe in that process. But it's not based on shame. It's not even based really on guilt. It's about taking personal responsibility and wanting to live a more empowered, joyful life. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. And I'm glad you're here with me on this journey. I'm going to look for that button now because I'm still learning how to do these live videos. See you later.